What if Xenomorphs came into Star Wars? The vast emptiness of wild space stretched before the Imperial mining vessel, harbinger like an endless void, punctuated only by the distant shimmer of unknown stars. Captain Vos Tharkin stood on the command bridge, his weathered face illuminated by the soft blue glow of the navicomputer. The expedition had ventured farther than any Imperial survey in decades, searching for kyber crystal deposits rumored to exist in this uncharted sector. Tharkin knew the Emperor's appetite for such resources was insatiable, especially after the completion of the first Death Star. Failure would mean more than just demotion. It would mean death. "Sir, sensors are detecting an anomalous structure on the approaching planetoid," Lieutenant Krell announced, her voice cutting through the silence of the bridge. "It appears artificial, but it doesn't match any known design in our database." Tharkin moved to the viewport, studying the barren, crater-marked surface of the small world rotating slowly beneath them. "Prepare a landing party. Full containment protocols. I want a detailed report on whatever that structure is within 6 hours." What the captain couldn't know was that the dark vessel embedded in the planetoid's surface had waited there for millennia, a derelict from a civilization that had encountered something so horrific that they had chosen to quarantine themselves far from any inhabited world. The Empire, in its relentless hunger for power, was about to awaken an ancient terror that would test the very limits of the Force itself. The Imperial shuttle cut through the thin atmosphere, dust swirling as it descended toward the coordinates of the anomaly. Stormtroopers in sealed environmental suits formed a perimeter around the landing site, while Imperial scientists prepared their equipment. Leading the expedition was Commander Norik Reith, the Emperor's special envoy for acquiring artifacts of unusual power. "Move quickly," Reith ordered, his voice distorted slightly through his helmet comm. "This planetoid rotates away from its star in 4 hours. I don't want to be here when the temperature drops." The structure rose before them like the skeletal remains of some enormous beast, curved and organic yet unmistakably engineered. It was unlike any ship design in Imperial records, neither resembling the sleek lines of Republic-era vessels nor the utilitarian bulk of Separatist craft. This was something older, alien in a way that seemed to reject the very principles of known physics. "Sir, we've found an entry point," called one of the troopers, his voice tight with unease. The opening in the hull was circular, rimmed with strange protrusions that resembled teeth or claws. Inside, the air was stale but breathable. Reith ordered helmets removed to better examine the surroundings. The interior walls were ribbed, almost like being inside the carcass of some enormous creature. Strange growths covered certain sections, organic-looking material that seemed to pulse slightly in the beam of their lights. "What is this substance?" Reith wondered aloud, reaching toward a viscous secretion along one wall. "Sir, I recommend against touching anything until proper analysis," cautioned the science officer, but Reith had already made contact with the resinous material. "It's hardened, like amber," he noted, then froze as his light illuminated what lay before them. The chamber opened into a vast space filled with thousands of leathery, egg-like objects arranged in perfect rows. At the center of the chamber sat a massive chair containing the desiccated remains of an alien pilot. Its chest burst outward as if something had exploded from within. "Begin scanning everything," Reith ordered, his voice hushed with awe and anticipation. "The Emperor will want specimens." As the Imperial team moved deeper into the vessel, they failed to notice the subtle movement within one of the eggs, a response to their body heat and motion. The ancient horror, dormant for countless millennia, stirred once more. On Coruscant, in the meditation chamber of his personal quarters, Darth Vader knelt in darkness. Through the Force, he monitored the distant edges of the Empire, feeling for threats or opportunities that might serve his master's will, or perhaps one day, his own ambitions. Suddenly, a tremor passed through him, faint yet distinct. Not a presence exactly, not like sensing another Force user, but rather the absence of something, a void in the Force itself. Vader's breathing continued its mechanical rhythm as he focused his concentration. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced before, a hunger that seemed to exist outside the normal currents of the Force, neither light nor dark. It was primal, ancient. The Dark Lord rose to his feet, his decision made. Whatever this disturbance was, it warranted investigation. Perhaps it was a weapon that could be harnessed, a new power that could tip the balance against the remaining Jedi and the growing rebellion. Or perhaps it was a threat that needed to be eliminated before it could challenge the Empire's dominion. Either way, Lord Vader would be the one to determine its fate. 12 hours after the initial landing, the Imperial Command lost contact with the exploration team. The Harbinger's captain, following strict protocol for unexplained communications failure, dispatched a heavily armed rescue squad. What they found upon entering the derelict vessel was a scene of carnage. Blood splattered the organic-looking walls, equipment lay abandoned, and there was no sign of Commander Reith or any of his team. "Fan out, search for survivors," ordered Sergeant Vex, his blaster rifle held at the ready. "And for Star's sake, keep your helmets sealed." The troopers moved cautiously through the alien corridors, the beams of their lights cutting through darkness that seemed almost alive, shifting and flowing around them. One trooper paused, his light playing over a strange formation on the ceiling. "Sergeant, you should see this," he called, his voice hushed. Sergeant Vex turned, his light joining the troopers to illuminate what appeared to be a human form cocooned in the same resinous material they had found throughout the ship. It was one of the scientists from the first team, his eyes open but unseeing, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. And in his chest was a perfectly circular hole, the edges seared as if by incredible heat or acid. "What in the name of the Emperor could do this?" whispered one of the troopers. His answer came in the form of a hiss from the shadows above. The creature descended with unnatural grace, its elongated head gleaming wetly in the light of their torches. It was like nothing they had ever encountered, a perfect killing machine with an eyeless face, razor-sharp teeth, and a sleek, armored exoskeleton. Blaster fire erupted, filling the chamber with brilliant red flashes that illuminated more shapes moving in the darkness. More of the nightmarish creatures converging on their position. The sergeant watched in horror as one of his men was impaled by a barbed tail, lifted screaming into the darkness above. "Fall back!" Vex shouted, firing continuously as he retreated, back to the shuttle. Only 3 of the 12 troopers made it back to the Harbinger, and one died minutes after reaching the medical bay, a creature erupting from his chest in a spray of blood and viscera. The ship's security team managed to kill the small, snake-like horror, but not before it had scuttled through the ventilation system, leaving a trail of corrosive blood that ate through metal like it was paper. Captain Tharkin ordered immediate quarantine procedures and sent an encoded transmission directly to Imperial High Command. The response came within hours, a single command transmitted on the highest priority channel: maintain position, await the arrival of Lord Vader, preserve specimens if possible. Tharkin looked at the message in disbelief. Preserve specimens, after what he had witnessed? But orders were orders, and one did not question directives that came with the Dark Lord's authority attached to them. What the captain didn't know was that the transmission had been intercepted by a rebel intelligence ship hiding in the shadow of a nearby moon. The Alliance, always vigilant for unusual Imperial activity, had been monitoring the mining expedition from a distance. Now, they too were aware that something of great importance had been discovered, something that had captured the attention of Vader himself. Commander Liana Rey, veteran of a dozen covert operations against the Empire, studied the intercepted transmission with growing concern. "Set course for Yavin 4, she told her pilot. "The Alliance leadership needs to know about this immediately." As her ship jumped to hyperspace, neither Rey nor the Imperials she had been observing realized that the true horror was just beginning. Aboard the Harbinger, in the darkness of the cargo hold where the bodies of the fallen troopers had been stored, something stirred. The infection had already taken root, and soon new horrors would emerge, born from the flesh of Imperial soldiers. The journey to Yavin 4 was tense. Commander Rey paced the small bridge of her intelligence vessel, the Whisper, reviewing the data they had managed to gather from the Imperial communications. Fragments of information suggested some kind of biological discovery, perhaps a new weapon. Whatever it was, Darth Vader's personal involvement indicated something of tremendous significance. "Commander, we're approaching Yavin 4, announced her pilot, Tarek Ven, a former Imperial officer who had defected after witnessing a civilian massacre on Lothal. The jungle moon came into view, its surface a vibrant green swirled with wisps of cloud. The rebel base, hidden within an ancient temple complex, had become the primary headquarters for the Alliance after their victory at Scarif. It was here that the leadership would decide how to respond to this new Imperial threat. Rey's report was met with grave concern by the Alliance Council. General Dodonna, his weathered face set in grim lines, considered the implications. "If Vader is personally investigating this discovery, we must learn more," he stated. "We cannot allow the Empire to acquire a new biological weapon, especially given their willingness to deploy the Death Star against civilian populations." Mon Mothma nodded in agreement. "We need more information before we can act. Commander Rey, assemble a small team for a reconnaissance mission. Observe only. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary." As the Alliance prepared its response, the Imperial Star Destroyer Executor dropped out of hyperspace near the Harbinger. Darth Vader stood on the command bridge, his masked gaze fixed on the mining vessel visible through the viewport. "Lord Vader, we have established contact with the Harbinger," reported Admiral Piet. "Captain Tharkin reports that the situation has deteriorated. They have lost contact with multiple sections of the ship, and there are reports of creatures moving through the ventilation systems." "Prepare my shuttle," Vader commanded, turning away from the viewport. "And inform Captain Tharkin that I expect a full briefing upon my arrival." The shuttle journey to the Harbinger was brief, but as Vader approached the mining vessel, he felt again that strange void in the Force, stronger now, a hunger that seemed to exist outside the normal currents of light and dark. Whatever these creatures were, they existed somehow apart from the living force that flowed through all other beings. The landing bay of the Harbinger was eerily quiet when Vader's shuttle touched down. A small reception party waited, led by a visibly shaken Captain Tharkin. Behind them, blast doors had been sealed, and armed troopers stood at alert positions. "Lord Vader," Tharkin began, bowing stiffly. "We have contained the creatures to the lower decks, but they are extremely difficult to kill. Conventional weapons seem to only slow them down, and their blood is highly corrosive." "Show me," Vader commanded, his mechanized voice echoing in the cavernous bay. Tharkin led Vader to the ship's security center, where monitors displayed feeds from the few remaining functional cameras in the quarantined sections. The images showed corridors transformed by the same organic resin found in the derelict ship, creating nightmarish tunnels where Imperial crew members hung cocooned along the walls. And moving through these altered environments were the creatures, sleek and deadly, sometimes crawling along walls and ceilings with insect-like precision. Vader watched as one of the aliens paused, seeming to sense the camera observing it. It approached slowly, its eyeless face filling the screen before the feed abruptly cut to static. "How many are there?" Vader asked. "Unknown, my lord," Tharkin replied. "They seem to reproduce using our crew as hosts. Each death potentially creates a new creature. We've lost over 60 personnel so far." Vader was silent for a moment, considering. These beings were unlike anything documented in Imperial records. They seemed to exist purely to hunt, to kill, and to multiply, with no higher purpose or consciousness that he could discern through the Force. "Have you captured any specimens alive?" Tharkin hesitated. "One, my lord. A smaller variant that seems newly born. We have it contained in a reinforced holding cell in the laboratory section." "Take me there," Vader ordered. The laboratory had been converted into a makeshift containment facility. Transparisteel barriers had been erected around a central chamber, where a pale, snake-like creature prowled restlessly. It had emerged from the chest of one of the troopers only hours earlier, but had already grown significantly. As Vader approached, the creature became agitated, hurling itself against the barrier with surprising force. Unlike other beings that recoiled from the Dark Lord's presence, sensing the power of the dark side, this creature showed no fear, only aggression. Vader extended his consciousness through the Force, attempting to sense the creature's mind, to bend it to his will as he had done with countless other beings. But where he should have felt thoughts, emotions, or even simple animal instincts, there was only that same void, a hunger that existed outside the Force itself. These creatures, Vader said finally, they are not natural to this galaxy. They do not exist within the Force as we understand it. Is that possible, my lord? Tharkin asked, clearly disturbed by the implication. The Force binds all living things, Vader replied. But these beings, they are something else. Something outside, that makes them potentially valuable. At that moment, the creature hurled itself against the barrier with renewed fury, and to the horror of the observing officers, a hairline crack appeared in the transparent steel. Before anyone could react, Vader extended his hand, and the creature was suddenly lifted into the air, caught in an invisible grip. The xenomorph thrashed wildly, its tail lashing back and forth as it was suspended by Vader's mastery of the Force. Though the creature existed as a void to Force senses, its physical form could still be manipulated. With a gesture of his gloved hand, Vader tightened his grip. The creature's exoskeleton began to crack, acidic blood seeping from the fractures. My lord, the acid, warned Tharkin, but Vader was already containing the corrosive substance with the Force, creating a barrier that prevented it from spraying across the laboratory. With a final crushing motion, Vader killed the creature, allowing its remains to fall harmlessly to the floor of the containment chamber. Vader observed, they can be killed, but their resistance to the Force makes them interesting. The Emperor will want to study them further. What are your orders, Lord Vader? Asked Tharkin. We will cleanse this ship, capture what specimens we can, and then locate the planetoid where the derelict was found. The Emperor desires knowledge of all potential weapons, and these creatures could prove useful against the rebellion. Unknown to Vader and the Imperial forces, Commander Rey's reconnaissance team had arrived in the system, their small ship using advanced cloaking technology developed from stolen Imperial prototypes. From a safe distance, they observed the Executor and the Harbinger, using long-range scanners to gather what information they could. Something's very wrong on that mining ship, observed Drayson, the team's technical specialist, as he studied the scanner readings. I'm detecting major power fluctuations, sealed compartments, and unusual organic compounds that don't match anything in our database. Rey frowned. Can we intercept any communications? Fragments only. Their systems seem to be malfunctioning, but I did catch part of a transmission from the Harbinger to the Executor. Something about specimens and containment failure. Rey made her decision quickly. We need to get closer. If the Empire is developing some kind of biological weapon, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. The rebel ship crept closer to the Imperial vessels, taking advantage of a debris field to mask their approach. They were close enough now to deploy specialized listening devices, technology that could intercept communications without requiring direct access to Imperial systems. What they heard over the next few hours chilled them to the bone. Fragmented reports of creatures loose in the ship, of transformed environments, of Imperial personnel being taken and used as hosts for new horrors. And most disturbing of all, Vader's intent to capture these beings for study and potential deployment as weapons. We need to warn the Alliance, Rey said grimly. But first, we need visual confirmation. Prepare the stealth shuttle. We're going to board that mining vessel. The decision was risky, perhaps foolhardy, but the Alliance needed to know exactly what they were facing. If Vader succeeded in weaponizing these creatures, the consequences for the galaxy would be devastating. As rebel agents prepared their desperate infiltration aboard the Harbinger, a new horror was emerging. In the deepest part of the ship, in what had once been the main cargo hold but was now a transformed alien hive, something massive stirred. Larger than the other creatures, with a crown-like crest on its elongated head, it moved with regal purpose among the cocooned bodies and resin-covered walls. The Queen had awakened, and with her, the true invasion would begin. Vader sensed the change immediately, a shift in the void that he had been monitoring through the Force. Something new had entered the equation, something greater than the individual hunters that had been stalking the ship. He stood in the Harbinger's command center, surrounded by nervous Imperial officers awaiting his orders. "Lord Vader," reported a communications officer, "we've lost contact with the engineering section. All personnel stationed there have gone silent." Vader turned his masked gaze toward the ship schematic displayed on the main console. The engineering section was the deepest part of the vessel, directly adjacent to the main cargo hold where the infestation had first taken root. "Seal off all remaining sections," Vader commanded. "Prepare to deploy specialized troops from the Executor. We will reclaim this vessel section by section." Before the orders could be carried out, the ship's systems flickered, emergency lighting activating as main power fluctuated wildly. "The creatures have reached the main power conduits," reported the ship's chief engineer, his voice tight with fear. "They're not just moving randomly, my lord. They're targeting critical systems." Vader absorbed this information with growing interest. These creatures were showing signs of coordination, of intelligence beyond mere animal instinct. That suggested control, and where there was control, there was potential for the control to be usurped. "Deploy Imperial Death Troopers to the affected areas," Vader ordered. "They are to capture at least one specimen alive, no matter the cost." As elite Imperial forces prepared to battle the spreading infestation, the small rebel shuttle approached the Harbinger's hull, attaching to a maintenance airlock far from the main docking bays. Using specialized cutting tools, Rey's team created their own entry point, slipping aboard the mining vessel undetected amid the chaos of the containment operation. "Life support is still functioning in this section," Drayson reported, checking his equipment, "but the air composition is strange. Higher carbon dioxide levels, trace amounts of unknown compounds." "Stay alert," Rey cautioned her team of 4 as they moved deeper into the ship. "We need to gather intelligence and visual confirmation, then get out. No heroics." They moved through dimly lit corridors, the emergency lighting casting long shadows that seemed to move and shift with lives of their own. Signs of battle were everywhere, blaster scorches marking walls and ceilings, abandoned equipment scattered across the floor. "Look at these marks," whispered Carvin, the team's security specialist, pointing to deep grooves in a metal bulkhead. "What could cut through durasteel like that?" Rey had no answer, but as they rounded the next corner, they found something that stopped them cold. The corridor ahead had been transformed, organic-looking resin covering the walls and floor, creating a tunnel that seemed more like the interior of some vast living organism than part of a starship. "Record everything," Rey ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Alliance needs to see this." They advanced cautiously into the transformed section, the soles of their boots sticking slightly to the resinous floor. The air grew warmer, humid, as if they were entering the lungs of some enormous beast. And embedded in the walls, partially covered by the organic growth, were the bodies of Imperial crew members, their expressions frozen in horror. "Are they dead?" Drayson asked, scanning one of the bodies with his equipment. "Life signs present but minimal," he reported after a moment. "They're in some kind of stasis." A distant sound echoed through the organic tunnels, something between a hiss and a screech. The rebel team froze, weapons raised. "We should go back," whispered Carvin. "We have enough for a preliminary report." Rey was about to agree when a different sound reached them, the distinctive rhythm of Imperial boots on metal flooring. They were about to be caught between whatever horror lurked in the transformed sections and an Imperial patrol. "This way," Rey decided, leading them deeper into the alien environment. "We'll circle back to the airlock once they've passed." It was a decision she would soon regret. The tunnels became more complex, branching and rejoining in patterns that defied the original layout of the ship. The rebels were quickly lost in a nightmare labyrinth of organic growth and cocooned bodies. And they were not alone. Movement flickered at the edge of their vision, shadows that seemed to flow rather than simply be cast by the dim emergency lighting. The feeling of being hunted grew with each passing moment. "Commander," Drayson whispered urgently, his scanner displaying multiple heat signatures converging on their position. "Now." They began to retreat the way they had come, but it was already too late. A creature dropped from an overhead tunnel, landing directly in front of them with inhuman grace. It rose to its full height, towering over even Carven, who stood just over 2 meters tall. In the dim light, they could see its elongated, eyeless head gleaming with a nightmarish wet sheen. Its lips pulled back to reveal metallic teeth, a hiss escaping as a secondary inner mouth extended briefly before retracting. Carven fired his blaster, the bolt striking the creature directly in the chest. It screeched in pain, staggering backward, but the wound immediately began to sizzle and smoke as acidic blood dripped to the floor, burning through the metal beneath. "Don't shoot unless you have to," Ray ordered. "That blood is like molecular acid." The creature recovered with frightening speed, lurching forward in a blur of motion. Ray managed to dive aside, but Drayson was not so fortunate. The Xenomorph's tail whipped around, the barbed tip piercing through his chest with terrible precision. Drayson's scream was cut short as he was lifted into the air, impaled on the creature's tail. The remaining rebels fled, the sounds of pursuit echoing through the transformed corridors of the ship. They ran blindly, all thoughts of their mission forgotten in the desperate need to escape. Turning a corner, they found themselves in what had once been a storage bay, but was now an alien chamber filled with the same leathery eggs they had glimpsed in their reconnaissance footage. Ray gasped, but the way they had come was already blocked by approaching creatures. They were trapped. It was then that a new sound reached them, the distinctive hum of a lightsaber activating. A crimson blade illuminated the darkness, and behind it, the imposing figure of Darth Vader strode into view, flanked by death troopers in their distinctive black armor. "Rebels," Vader observed, his mechanized voice carrying easily across the chamber. "Your presence here is unexpected." Rey raised her blaster, knowing it was futile but unwilling to surrender without a fight. Before she could fire, Vader extended his hand, and the weapon was torn from her grasp by an invisible force, flying across the chamber into the dark. Lord's waiting grip. "Your weapons are useless against me," Vader stated, "and largely ineffective against these creatures as well." As if in response to his words, the Xenomorphs that had been pursuing the rebels emerged into the chamber, hissing and snarling. Yet surprisingly, they kept their distance, seemingly wary of the Dark Lord and his ignited lightsaber. "You sense it too," Vader said, addressing the creatures rather than the rebels. "The power of the Force. You exist outside it, yet you are not immune to its effects." Rey watched in astonishment as Vader extended his free hand toward the nearest Xenomorph. The creature writhed, caught in an invisible grip, lifted off the ground just as she had seen him do to countless rebel soldiers. But this time, the effort was visible even through Vader's mechanical stillness. These beings resisted the Force in ways that other life forms did not. "Fascinating," Vader said, as he released the creature, which dropped to the ground and immediately retreated into the shadows. "They can be controlled. But it requires a significant effort." He turned his attention back to the rebels. "You will tell me why the Alliance has sent spies to this vessel." Rey stood defiant, but before she could speak, the chamber trembled, the vibration growing until loose equipment began to fall from shelves and walls. Something massive was approaching. The eggs around them began to stir, their tops peeling open like grotesque flowers. From within, pale spider-like creatures emerged, scuttling across the floor with alarming speed. "Back to the corridor," Vader ordered his death troopers. "Bring the rebels." The retreat was orderly but swift, the Imperial forces and their prisoners barely clearing the chamber before dozens of the facehuggers swarmed the area they had just vacated. The blast doors sealed behind them, momentarily halting the creature's pursuit. "What are those things?" gasped one of the rebel agents, Terran, who had been silent, until now, overcome with horror. "The first stage of their life cycle," Vader replied, surprising them with his willingness to explain. "They implant embryos, which later emerge from the host's body, a most efficient method of reproduction." Rey felt sick at the clinical way Vader described the horrific process. "And you want to use these things as weapons? They can't be controlled. You'll doom entire worlds." "The Empire brings order to chaos," Vader responded. "These creatures are chaos embodied, but all things can be bent to serve the Emperor's will." Their conversation was interrupted by a new tremor, stronger than before. The sealed blast doors began to buckle, the metal groaning under immense pressure. Something far larger than the hunters they had encountered was forcing its way through. "Prepare for combat," Vader commanded his death troopers. The doors burst inward, torn from their frame by massive limbs. In the opening stood a creature that dwarfed the others, its elongated head crowned with a bony crest, its body protected by an exoskeleton far thicker than its smaller kin. The Queen had arrived. Vader's lightsaber hummed as he raised it to a guard position. The Queen considered him, her eyeless face turning slightly as if assessing this new threat. Around her, more of the smaller Xenomorphs gathered, awaiting her command. "Remarkable," Vader said, "a hive consciousness. Similar to certain insectoid species, but far more complex." The Queen hissed, a sound that reverberated through the corridor, and her warriors surged forward. Vader met them with his lightsaber, the crimson blade slicing through alien limbs and exoskeletons. The death troopers opened fire, their specialized weapons more effective than standard blasters, capable of penetrating the creature's armored hides without releasing too much of their corrosive blood. In the chaos, Rey saw their opportunity. "Now," she whispered to her remaining team members, and they broke away, running down an adjacent corridor while Vader and his troopers were engaged with the Xenomorph horde. They raced through the ship, trying to remember the path back to their entry point. Behind them, the sounds of battle faded, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow more terrifying than the screeches and weapons fire had been. "Do you think Vader can defeat that thing?" Terran asked, as they paused at an intersection, trying to get their bearings. "I don't know," Rey replied honestly. "But we need to get back to our ship and warn the Alliance about these creatures. If even one of them reaches a populated world." They chose a corridor that seemed to lead toward the outer hull, hoping it would bring them back to their airlock. Instead, they found themselves in what had once been the ship's medical bay, now transformed like much of the vessel into an alien hive environment. And they were not alone. Cocooned against one wall was an Imperial officer, still alive, his eyes widening as he saw them. "Help me," he pleaded, his voice weak. "Please." Rey hesitated, her rebel instincts warring with her basic humanity. This was an enemy, but he was also a sentient being facing a fate worse than death. "We can't leave him," said Carvin, already moving toward the cocooned officer. "Wait," Rey cautioned, scanning the officer with her handheld sensor. "He's been implanted. There's something inside him." The officer's expression shifted from hope to horror as he realized what she was saying. "Kill me," he whispered. "For pity's sake, kill me before it." His plea was cut short as he convulsed, blood spurting from his mouth. His chest began to bulge outward, the fabric of his uniform stretching and tearing as something pushed from within. "Run," Rey ordered, already backing toward the exit. "There's nothing we can do for him." They fled as the officer's chest burst open in a spray of blood and viscera, a small, pale creature emerging from the grisly wound. The newborn Xenomorph screeched, its sound following them down the corridor as they ran for their lives. Back at the site of the main battle, Vader stood amid the bodies of fallen Xenomorphs, their acid blood contained by his mastery of the Force. Several death troopers lay dead as well, their armor melted or punctured by the creature's attacks. But the Queen had retreated, wounded, but very much alive, pulling her remaining warriors back into the depths of the transformed ship. Vader deactivated his lightsaber, clipping it to his belt as he surveyed the battlefield. These creatures were formidable, their resistance to the Force making them difficult to control through conventional means. But he had sensed something during the confrontation, a primitive connection between the Queen and her warriors, a form of communication that might be exploited. "Secure this section," he ordered the surviving Death Troopers. "I must contact the Emperor." In his private communication chamber aboard the Executor, Vader knelt as the holographic image of Emperor Palpatine materialized before him. The Emperor's hooded visage regarded him with eyes that gleamed with interest. "Lord Vader," Palpatine's voice rasped, "you have discovered something unusual." "Yes, my master," Vader replied. "The creatures are unlike anything documented in Imperial records. They exist outside the Force in ways I have not encountered before." "Describe them to me," the Emperor commanded. Vader detailed the Xenomorphs' physical capabilities, their life cycle, and most importantly, their hive structure centered around the Queen. "Most interesting," Palpatine mused when Vader had finished, "a species that exists as a void in the Force. Such beings could prove valuable against Force-sensitive enemies. The remaining Jedi would find them difficult to sense or influence." "They are dangerous, my master," Vader cautioned. "Difficult to control. Their blood is molecular acid, capable of eating through almost any material, and they reproduce with alarming speed, using living hosts to incubate their young." "All weapons require proper handling, Lord Vader," the Emperor replied dismissively. "You will capture the Queen alive. Our scientists will study these creatures, determine how best to harness their abilities. Imagine a battalion of such hunters, set loose on rebel worlds." "As you wish, my master," Vader responded, though internally he harbored doubts. These creatures were not mere animals to be trained or conditioned. They were something else entirely, a perfect evolution of hunting instinct with no moral constraints, no concept of loyalty or service beyond their own hive. But the Emperor had spoken, and his will would be done. As Vader prepared to return to the Harbinger, Commander Rey and her surviving team members had finally located their entry point. They sealed themselves in the airlock, breathing sighs of relief as the alien environment of the infested ship was shut behind them. "We need to warn the Alliance," Rey said as they returned to their shuttle. "These creatures, if they reach a populated world." "But what can we do?" asked Terran. Even Vader was struggling against them. Rey's expression was grim as she powered up the shuttle's engines. "I don't know. But we can't let the Empire weaponize them. We need to destroy that ship and anything else carrying these things, no matter the cost." As their shuttle detached from the Harbinger and slipped away under cloak, Vader returned to the mining vessel, determined to fulfill his master's command. The capture of the Xenomorph Queen would require all his power and cunning, but success would provide the Empire with a weapon of terrifying potential. The hunt had begun, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. The Rebel shuttle raced through hyperspace, carrying its traumatized crew and terrible news toward the Alliance headquarters on Yavin 4. Commander Rey sat in the pilot's seat, her face illuminated by the blue swirl of hyperspace, visible through the viewport. Her hands trembled slightly as she replayed the horrors they had witnessed. The creatures moved like living shadows, their very existence a perversion of nature itself. And now Vader sought to control them, to unleash them as weapons against the rebellion. "How do we even begin to explain this?" Carvin asked, breaking the heavy silence that had fallen over the shuttle's cabin. "These things, they're not just weapons, they're an extinction event waiting to happen." Rey's jaw tightened. "We tell them the truth. That the Empire has discovered something worse than the Death Star, a weapon that doesn't just destroy worlds, but infests them, transforms them." The shuttle dropped out of hyperspace near Yavin 4, the gas giant looming large with its verdant moon orbiting silently below. As they approached the hidden rebel base, Rey prepared herself for a report that would sound like madness to anyone who hadn't seen the creatures firsthand. The Alliance leadership gathered quickly once Rey's team had landed. General Dodonna, Mon Mothma, and other high-ranking officials listened in stunned silence as Rey recounted their discovery, supported by the horrific footage they had managed to capture aboard the Harbinger. "These beings," Mon Mothma said finally, her composed voice belying the concern in her eyes, "they truly cannot be sensed through the Force." According to Vader himself, Rey confirmed, he called them voids, existing outside the Force somehow. He could still affect them physically with his powers, but it seemed to require more effort than normal. General Dodonna studied the tactical display, where the position of the Imperial vessels was marked. If Vader captures these creatures, learns to control them somehow, the consequences for the Alliance would be catastrophic. We must destroy that ship before they can transport any specimens. Our intelligence suggests the Harbinger's hyperdrive is non-functional, Rey added. They're stranded in that system for now, but the Executor could easily transport captured specimens. Then we have no choice, Dodonna decided. We must launch an immediate attack. Destroy the Harbinger, the derelict on the planetoid, and any specimens the Empire has already collected. The plan was formed quickly. A strike force of X-Wing and Y-Wing fighters would jump into the system, launch a surprise attack on the Harbinger, and withdraw before the Executor could mount an effective defense. The mission would be led by Commander Luke Skywalker, whose growing reputation as a pilot had earned him the respect of the Alliance forces. As the pilots prepared for the mission, Luke sought out Commander Rey, wanting to learn more about what they would be facing. "You actually saw Vader fighting these things?" Luke asked, his young face solemn as he absorbed the implications. Rey nodded. "It was incredible and terrifying. His lightsaber cut through them easily enough, but their blood, it's like molecular acid. Even Vader had to use the Force to contain it, prevent it from eating through the ship's hull." Luke's expression grew distant, his thoughts turning to his own recent encounters with the Dark Lord. "And you say these creatures exist outside the Force somehow?" That's what Vader claimed. He said they were voids, that he couldn't sense them the way he could other life forms. Luke considered this information carefully. As his own connection to the Force had grown stronger under Obi-Wan Kenobi's brief tutelage, he had begun to sense the living energy that connected all things. The idea of beings that existed outside that connection was disturbing on a fundamental level. "Be careful, Commander Skywalker," Rey said, seeing the determination in his eyes. "These things, they're unlike anything I've ever encountered. They don't fear, they don't negotiate, they don't retreat. They just kill." Luke nodded, his resolve hardening. "We'll destroy them, all of them. The galaxy has enough nightmares already with the Empire. It doesn't need these things too." As the rebel strike force prepared to depart, aboard the Harbinger, Darth Vader stalked the transformed corridors of the mining vessel. The ship had become a labyrinth of organic tunnels, the metal infrastructure barely visible beneath layers of resinous secretion. Death troopers moved ahead of him, scanning for movement, their specialized weapons ready. Vader had devised a new strategy for capturing the Queen. Rather than hunting her directly, he would draw her out using the one thing she would not abandon, her eggs. Imperial scientists had located what appeared to be the primary egg chamber, deep within the cargo holds of the ship. If they could secure that chamber, the Queen would come to them. "Set up the containment field here," Vader ordered as they reached the entrance to the vast cargo bay. "Be prepared for immediate activation on my command." The Imperial technicians worked quickly, installing portable field generators around the perimeter of the chamber. These would create an energy barrier capable of containing even the massive Xenomorph Queen, provided it could be activated before she could escape. Vader stepped into the chamber, his lightsaber ignited, the crimson blade casting an eerie glow over the thousands of eggs that filled the space. In the center of the chamber, suspended from the ceiling, was a massive, pulsating sac, from which new eggs emerged at regular intervals. The Queen was not present, but Vader could sense her awareness focused on him, a cold, alien intelligence monitoring his intrusion into her domain. Through the Force, he projected his intentions, not communication exactly, but impressions of threat directed at her precious eggs. The response was immediate and violent. Xenomorph warriors poured into the chamber from hidden entrances, converging on Vader and his troops with single-minded fury. The Death Troopers opened fire, cutting down the first wave, but more kept coming, climbing along walls and ceilings, approaching from all directions. Vader stood unmoved in the center of the chaos, his lightsaber a blur of motion as he cut down creature after creature. Through the Force, he lifted several Xenomorphs simultaneously, hurling them against walls with bone-crushing force, but for each one that fell, 2 more emerged from the shadows. And then, as Vader had anticipated, the Queen arrived. She tore through the ceiling, ripping aside metal and organic resin with equal ease, her massive form descending into the chamber with predatory grace. She stood nearly twice Vader's height, her elongated head crowned with the bony crest that distinguished her from her warriors. A shriek of rage escaped her as she beheld the Dark Lord threatening her eggs. "Now," Vader commanded, and the Imperial technicians activated the containment field. Energy barriers sprang to life around the perimeter of the chamber, cutting off all escape routes. The Queen seemed to understand immediately that she had been trapped. Her warriors continued their assault, but Vader sensed a shift in her strategy. She was watching, evaluating, looking for weaknesses in both the Dark Lord and the energy barrier that confined her. Vader reached out through the Force, attempting to dominate the Queen's will as he had done with countless other beings. The resistance was immense, like trying to grasp smoke with his bare hands. The Queen existed partially outside the Force, a void that absorbed his power without yielding, but Vader was nothing if not persistent. He focused his concentration, drawing deeply on the dark side, pushing through the resistance until he felt the faintest connection, a tendril of influence extending from his consciousness to the alien Queen's. In that moment of contact, something unexpected happened. Rather than simply bending to his will, the Queen's alien consciousness pushed back, a savage intelligence colliding with Vader's disciplined mind. Images flooded through the connection, glimpses of worlds consumed by the Xenomorph hive, entire species harvested as hosts for their endless reproduction. And beneath these visions, a hunger so vast and ancient that it stunned even the Dark Lord. These creatures were not merely predators, they were a galactic plague, designed or evolved for a single purpose: to consume all other life. Vader broke the connection, staggering slightly under the psychic backlash. The Queen shrieked again, a sound that seemed almost triumphant. She had resisted him, had pushed her own alien thoughts into his mind. It was not a victory she could understand in human terms, but on some primal level she had established dominance. "Lord Vader," called the commander of the Death Troopers, concern evident even through his helmet's vocoder. "We're receiving a priority alert from the Executor. Rebel ships have entered the system." Vader's focus shifted momentarily, reaching out through the Force to sense the approaching threat. It was a small strike force, but led by a presence that burned bright in the Force, familiar yet changed since their last encounter. "Skywalker," Vader breathed, the name carrying layers of meaning and emotion that even his vocoder could not fully mask. The Queen sensed his distraction and charged, her massive form moving with shocking speed for her size. Vader barely had time to raise his lightsaber before she was upon him, claws and tail lashing out with deadly precision. The crimson blade sliced through one reaching limb, sending it crashing to the floor, acidic blood contained by Vader's mastery of the Force. But the Queen adapted quickly, her attacks becoming more cautious, testing his defenses rather than committing fully. Outside the ship, the rebel strike force approached rapidly, led by Luke Skywalker in his X-Wing fighter. The formation of 24 ships split as they neared the Imperial vessels, the X-Wings moving to engage the Executors, TIE fighters, while the Y-Wings commenced their bombing run on the Harbinger. "Red Squadron, keep those TIEs off the bombers," Luke commanded, banking his X-Wing sharply to intercept an approaching squadron of Imperial fighters. "Gold Leader, you're clear for your attack run." The Y-Wings dove toward the Harbinger, their ion cannons firing to disable the mining vessel's remaining defensive systems. Behind them, proton torpedoes were armed, ready to deliver a killing blow to the infested ship. Aboard the Executor, Admiral Piet watched the unfolding battle with growing concern. "Lord Vader is still on the Harbinger," he noted to his second-in-command. "Order all fighters to protect that vessel at all costs." The space around the Imperial ships erupted in a chaotic dance of laser fire and explosions as Rebel and Imperial fighters engaged in a desperate battle. Luke's X-Wing wove through the conflict with unnatural precision, his connection to the Force guiding his reflexes and instincts. "I'm picking up strange readings from the Harbinger," reported Wedge Antilles, flying as Luke's wingman. "Some kind of organic contamination spreading throughout the ship." "That confirms Commander Ray's report," Luke replied grimly. "Those things are transforming the entire vessel. We need to destroy it completely, make sure nothing survives." On the Harbinger, the battle between Vader and the Xenomorph Queen had reached a stalemate. The Dark Lord had wounded the massive creature multiple times, but her incredible resilience and adaptability made her a formidable opponent. Around them, her warriors continued to fall to the Death Troopers' weapons, but their numbers seemed endless. The ship shuddered as the first Y-wing torpedoes struck, alarms blaring throughout the vessel. "Lord Vader," the Death Trooper commander reported, "the rebels are targeting the ship's main reactor. Structural integrity is failing in sections 3 through 7. Vader made his decision instantly. The Queen was too dangerous to transport, too difficult to control, but her genetic material, her biological secrets, those could still be salvaged. "Collect tissue samples from the fallen creatures," he ordered. "Prepare for immediate evacuation." The Queen seemed to sense his intent, her rage manifesting in a renewed assault. But Vader was done testing her capabilities. With full focus now, he unleashed the true power of the dark side, lifting the massive creature into the air, suspending her in a force grip that even her alien physiology could not resist. With his free hand, Vader ignited his lightsaber once more and, with surgical precision, severed the Queen's elongated head from her body. As both parts fell to the floor, he contained the spray of acid blood, preventing it from destroying the valuable biological material. "Collect the head," he commanded. "It contains the brain and primary genetic material. Leave the rest." As the Imperial forces retreated toward their shuttles, the Harbinger sustained more hits from the rebel bombing run. Fires spread throughout the vessel, and structural supports began to fail as the acid blood from hundreds of slain xenomorphs ate through critical systems. Luke sensed Vader's presence aboard the mining ship, a dark nexus in the Force that was impossible to mistake. For a moment, he was tempted to break formation, to confront the man who had killed his father and mentor. But the mission came first. The xenomorph threat had to be eliminated. "Gold Leader, target the main reactor," Luke ordered. "Let's finish this." The Y-Wings adjusted their attack vector, concentrating fire on the Harbinger's power core. Successive hits breached the containment fields, initiating a chain reaction that would destroy the vessel completely. Vader's shuttle launched from the dying ship just moments before the reactor reached critical mass. From the viewport, he watched as the Harbinger erupted in a massive explosion, the infested vessel breaking apart in a bloom of fire and debris. But the Dark Lord's mission was not a complete failure. Secured in a specialized containment unit was the severed head of the Xenomorph Queen, along with tissue samples from various warrior drones. Imperial scientists would study these materials, unravel the genetic secrets of these extraordinary creatures. As his shuttle docked with the Executor, Vader felt a familiar presence retreating from the battle. Skywalker had led the attack, had nearly trapped him aboard the doomed vessel. The boy's power was growing, his command of the Force developing even without proper training. "Set course for the Imperial Research Station in the Quorum system," Vader ordered as he strode onto the Executor's bridge, "and inform the Emperor that while the primary specimens were lost, we have secured sufficient biological material for study." The rebel fleet jumped to hyperspace as soon as the Harbinger's destruction was confirmed. narrowly avoiding the full might of the Executor's weapon systems. The mission had been a success, the immediate threat of the Xenomorph infestation eliminated, but as Luke's X-Wing streaked through hyperspace back to Yavin 4, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had escaped the destruction, that the nightmare they had confronted was not so easily vanquished. His intuition was correct. In the debris field that had once been the Harbinger, a single escape pod drifted silently, its systems powered down to avoid detection. Inside, cocooned in resinous secretion, was the sole survivor of the mining vessel's crew, his chest already bulging with the new life growing within him. And far beyond the known regions of space, on countless worlds uncharted by either the Empire or the Rebellion, hives of the same nightmarish creatures thrived, waiting for the opportunity to spread across the galaxy. The derelict ship that had brought the first Xenomorph to Imperial attention was just one of many, crashed or abandoned by a long-vanished first species that had learned too late the consequences of tampering with the perfect organism. The battle won had been but the opening skirmish in a war that neither side yet fully comprehended. Months passed. The Alliance celebrated its momentous victory at Yavin, where Luke Skywalker destroyed the Death Star, striking a critical blow against Imperial tyranny. Yet even as the rebellion gained momentum, new reports began to surface from the Outer Rim, frontier worlds going silent, mining colonies found abandoned, their interiors transformed by strange organic growth. Freighters discovered drifting in space, their crews missing or worse. In his meditation chamber aboard the Executor, now tasked with hunting down the rebel fleet, Darth Vader reviewed the latest findings from the Imperial Research Facility in the Quorum system. The scientists had made significant progress in analyzing the Xenomorph genetic material, unlocking secrets that both fascinated and disturbed even the Dark Lord. The creatures were not natural evolution, at least not entirely. There were signs of ancient genetic engineering, modifications so sophisticated that they could only have been made by a civilization far more advanced than any known to the Empire. The Xenomorphs had been designed as the perfect weapon, capable of adapting to any environment, incorporating genetic material from their hosts to better hunt them, and reproducing with terrifying efficiency. But most disturbing of all was the discovery that the creatures shared certain genetic markers with kyber crystals, the force-sensitive gems that powered lightsabers and, on a much larger scale, the Death Star's superlaser. This connection explained their unusual relationship with the Force, their existence as voids that could not be easily sensed or influenced. Emperor Palpatine had been most interested in this discovery. If the connection could be understood and manipulated, it might be possible to create Force-resistant soldiers, beings that could stand against Jedi without being vulnerable to their mind tricks or sensing abilities. Vader's contemplation was interrupted by an alert from the bridge. A transmission had been received from an Imperial outpost in the Outer Rim on the planet Felucia. The jungle world had been the site of fierce battles during the Clone Wars, and now hosted a small Imperial research station studying the planet's unique flora. The message was brief and fragmented, the signal breaking up as it was transmitted. Unknown organisms, spreading through the jungle, cannot be contained. Request immediate evacuation. They came from below, from the ancient ruins. Vader rose from his meditation chamber, his decision already made. The Xenomorph threat had re-emerged, this time on a world within Imperial space. It had to be contained before it could spread further. Admiral Piet, he commanded as he reached the bridge, set course for the Felucia system, and inform the Emperor that we have confirmation of another infestation. On Dagobah, in a small hut nestled among the swamp trees, Master Yoda sat in deep meditation. Through the Force, he had sensed the disturbance caused by the Xenomorph outbreak, a spreading void that threatened the very balance of the galaxy. Luke Skywalker, who had recently begun his training with the ancient Jedi Master, noticed his mentor's troubled expression. "What is it, Master Yoda?" Luke asked. "I sense something wrong." Yoda opened his eyes slowly, his wizened face grave. "An ancient enemy returned has. Outside the Force, it exists, yet threatens all living things. Warned about this, the old Jedi Order was, many centuries ago, the creatures from the Harbinger, Luke realized. You know about them? Yes. In the ancient texts, mentioned they were. The Great Devourers, some called them. Created they were by a race long vanished, as weapons against the Force itself. Luke frowned, trying to understand. Weapons against the Force? How is that possible? Always two sides to the Force there are, Yoda explained. Light and dark, creation and destruction, life and death. But these creatures, outside this balance they exist. Neither light nor dark they serve, only hunger and reproduction. But they were destroyed, Luke insisted. We bombed the ship, made sure nothing survived. Yoda shook his head sadly. Never just one nest there is, always spreading, always hunting. If found the galaxy they have again, great danger we all face. The implications were staggering, a threat that existed outside the Force that could not be easily sensed or controlled by either Jedi or Sith. A perfect predator designed to consume all other life, spreading from world to world with unstoppable momentum. I have to warn the Alliance, Luke said, rising to his feet. No, Yoda replied firmly. Complete your training you must. Faced before, this threat has been by Jedi more prepared than you. A particular kind of darkness required it is, to battle darkness beyond the Force. What do you mean? Luke asked, confused by the Master's words. Learn this, you will, Yoda said enigmatically. When ready you are. On Felucia, Darth Vader led a contingent of specialized stormtroopers into the jungle surrounding the Imperial Research Station. The lush vegetation steamed in the humid air, massive fungal growths towering above them like alien skyscrapers. But something had changed since the Empire's last survey of the planet. The natural life was being overtaken by the same resinous secretion that had transformed the Harbinger, organic tunnels and structures emerging from the jungle floor and climbing up the massive fungi. Life signs ahead, my lord, reported the scout trooper leading the expedition, but they're strange, not matching any known species in our database. Vader extended his senses through the Force, feeling the familiar void that marked the presence of Xenomorphs. But there was something else here as well, something ancient and powerful buried deep beneath the jungle floor. They have established a hive, Vader observed, larger than the one aboard the Harbinger. The expedition continued deeper into the transformed jungle, encountering signs of battle around the now silent research station. Blaster marks scored the walls, and the remains of stormtroopers and scientists were found cocooned in the same manner as the crew of the mining vessel had been. But what troubled Vader most was the evidence that the infestation had been present on Felucia for some time, perhaps predating the Imperial presence altogether. The Xenomorphs had not been brought here by some freighter or escape pod from the Harbinger. They had been here, dormant or contained somehow, until recent disturbances had released them. The trail led to an ancient structure buried beneath the jungle, partially exposed by Imperial excavation. The architecture was unlike anything in Imperial records, predating even the Old Republic by thousands of years. And etched into the stone walls were depictions of the Xenomorphs, shown in various stages of their life cycle, worshipped as gods by a long-vanished species of Felucians. They've been here for millennia, realized the Imperial archaeologist accompanying the expedition. This temple, these carvings, they're at least 15,000 years old. Not just here, Vader replied, studying the ancient murals with growing concern. The carvings depict similar temples on other worlds. This was a cult that spread across the galaxy, worshipping these creatures as agents of transformation. The implications were clear and disturbing. The xenomorph threat was not new to the galaxy, nor was it confined to a single outbreak. These perfect predators had existed in the shadows of civilization for thousands of years, periodically emerging to consume entire species before returning to dormancy. And now, with the Empire and Rebellion spreading to every corner of the galaxy, disturbing ancient ruins and forgotten temples in their search for resources and advantages, these dormant threats were awakening once more. Deeper into the temple they ventured, following the spreading infestation to its source. The central chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows high above, and there, in the center of the chamber, was a sight that gave even Darth Vader pause. Not one xenomorph queen, but three, their massive forms arranged around an ancient altar of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Upon the altar lay a crystal, similar to the kyber crystals used in lightsabers but larger and utterly black. A vergence, Vader said, recognizing the concentration of force energy centered on the crystal, a nexus of power. But unlike other vergences Vader had encountered, this one did not radiate energy outward. Instead, it seemed to draw the force inward, creating the void that characterized the xenomorphs. The crystal was not just similar to kyber, it was kyber's opposite, anti-force material that had been used to create the perfect predators. One of the queens detected their presence, turning her massive crested head toward the intruders. She rose to her full height, dwarfing even the impressive stature of Vader. Around them, warrior drones emerged from the shadows, hundreds of them, moving with predatory grace as they encircled the Imperial expedition. "Hold position," Vader commanded his troops. "Do not fire unless I order it." The Dark Lord stepped forward, his lightsaber ignited but held low, not in a threatening stance. He reached out through the Force, not attempting to dominate the queens as he had before, but seeking connection, understanding. The lead queen lowered her head, bringing her eyeless face level with Vader's mask. For a long moment, they regarded each other, two predators assessing potential prey or ally. Then, slowly, the queen extended one clawed hand toward the altar, toward the black crystal at its center. A vision flashed through Vader's mind, conveyed not through the Force but through some other connection, a sharing of genetic memory perhaps. He saw ancient beings, their technology far beyond even the Empire's capabilities, creating the first xenomorphs as weapons against Force-sensitive species that had threatened their dominion. He saw wars fought across the stars, worlds consumed by the perfect predators, and then a decision to contain the threat rather than let it spread unchecked. The xenomorphs had been put into stasis, hidden on remote worlds with these anti-force crystals to keep them dormant. But the crystal's power had faded over millennia, and now, with the recent disturbances in the Force caused by the Clone Wars, the rise of the Empire, and the destruction of Alderaan, they were awakening from their long slumber, and they were hungry. The Queen's intention became clear to Vader: not alliance, not submission, but consumption. The xenomorphs did not recognize authority or hierarchy outside their own hive. They existed only to feed, to reproduce, to spread across the galaxy until all other life had been harvested or transformed. Withdraw to the entrance, Vader ordered his troops, recognizing the immediate danger. Prepare the seismic charges. The Imperial forces began a fighting retreat as the xenomorph horde surged forward. Vader stood his ground, his lightsaber a crimson blur as he cut down warrior after warrior, buying time for his troops to reach the relative safety of the temple entrance. But even the Dark Lord's power had limits. There were too many of the creatures, their coordination too perfect under the Queen's guidance. Vader was forced to fall back, using the Force to collapse sections of the temple behind him, temporarily slowing the xenomorph pursuit. At the temple entrance, Imperial engineers had placed seismic charges designed to collapse the entire structure, burying the hive and its queens beneath thousands of tons of stone. It would not kill them all, but it would contain the threat temporarily, giving the Empire time to prepare a more permanent solution. Vader was the last to emerge from the temple, his armor scored by acid burns, his cape in tatters. Behind him, the seething mass of xenomorphs was just visible in the darkness of the entrance. "Detonate the charges," he ordered. The explosion was massive, shaking the jungle floor and sending birds and other creatures fleeing in panic. The temple collapsed in on itself, dust and debris billowing outward in a great cloud. For a moment, it seemed the threat had been contained, but as the dust settled, Vader sensed movement beneath the rubble. The xenomorphs were burrowing, using their acid blood to dissolve stone, creating new passages to the surface. The containment was temporary at best. "Return to the Executor," Vader commanded. "We must inform the Emperor that the threat is greater than we anticipated." As the Imperial shuttle lifted off from Felucia, Vader stood at the viewport, watching the transformed jungle recede beneath them. The xenomorph infestation would spread across the planet within weeks, consuming or converting all native life forms. And from there, it would seek new worlds, new hosts, new hunting grounds. The galaxy now faced a threat unlike any it had encountered before. Not a political conflict like the struggle between Empire and Rebellion, not a philosophical divide like the eternal battle between Jedi and Sith, but an existential crisis that threatened all sentient life. Light side and dark side, Imperial and Rebel, all would be equally consumed by the perfect predator if it could not be stopped. The question was whether ancient enemies could set aside their differences long enough to confront this greater threat. As the shuttle docked with the Executor, Vader made his decision. The Emperor would be informed, of course, but contingency plans would also be put in motion. If the Empire fell or proved inadequate, the task of containing the xenomorph threat, alternatives would need to be ready. Because in the face of extinction, even the darkest Lord of the Sith recognized the value of hope, the necessity of balance. And somewhere out in the galaxy, a young Jedi was training, growing stronger in the Force day by day. A potential ally, or at least a worthy successor, should Vader himself fall in the coming war against the perfect predator. The galaxy's future hung in the balance, with ancient horrors awakening from their long slumber to challenge the dominion of both Empire and Rebellion. The war between xenomorph and sentient life had begun anew, a conflict that would test the limits of the Force itself. And in the darkness between the stars, watching with inhuman patience, the hive mind of the perfect predator prepared for the coming feast.